This week, we're covering the different options you have in pipeline to control who can view and manage the tasks. And why that's important? A couple reasons. From the visibility perspective, it helps reduce clutter. And you know how we feel about clutter. The less clutter, the more likely it is to get read because it's easier to read. It's more relevant for everyone who's looking at it. If you've got a particular task that's not relevant to a particular person and it's shown, it makes it much less likely that the person's going to consider those checklists in the future, right? They'll disregard them. They know that they've got to sort of weed through them. It just makes them less enticed to actually address them when they've got tasks that aren't relevant to them. So keep them nice and relevant to whoever's looking at it by reducing that visibility. That's why it's important. We'll go into that. Also, since reminders are sent about the tasks, again, want to keep those super relevant. And all of that relevancy ultimately leads to better compliance for you, right? Because again, more likely to attend to them. Also important for some offices because some of their checklists are proprietary, right? Particularly for several TCs that we work with. Their tasks are proprietary. They don't want some groups to be able to see other groups' tasks or some clients. Okay. Alrighty, so let's get into how you can manage that control. Basically, there are 3 layers of visibility and management permissions or controls. The first is permissions. So let's hop over to admin settings. I'm going to open this in a separate tab. And then manage users. And let's jump into Jordan's profile here. If you've got multiple locations, under whatever location you're giving them permissions, you've got the ability to give them 2 checklist permissions. The first one is the basic ability to add a checklist to a transaction. That's super appropriate to give to agents if that's, what your workflow involves, and obviously admins as well. The second one, though, fully managed checklist permissions, gives whoever you give that permission both the ability to manage checklists under manage checklist templates, right? So they've got the ability let me go to a separate tab here, under checklists, for any checklist that they've got that permission for to manage them here, including edit the tasks, etc. Everything related to that, okay? So it gives them that ability as well as the ability to manage the checklists and the tasks on transactions, right? So that means changing the due date, changing the text of the task if they need to, deleting the task, changing the due date, etc. Okay, so it fully gives them the ability to manage checklists, both to set them up as well as to use them. Okay, and this is definitely an admin level permission. Okay, so that's baseline, is giving them that permission to either manage or to check off and administer the tasks on transactions. Okay, first level. Next level gets into visibility, or controls who can see each individual task. So let's hop back over to a transaction. And obviously, who can see each task is important for the reasons we talked about at the top there, right? Reducing that clutter, making everything relevant, etc. And it's best to I'm going to jump over to the checklist template. It's best to do this at the checklist template level, right? So let's hop into one of these templates here. Let's go into listing residential checklist. Best to do this at the template level because you're setting who's going to be able to see this task. So if I click here, I can say that it's visible to anyone, which is the default. I can set it to be visible to only admins, listing agents on the transaction, buying agents on the transaction, listing and buying, or at mention. We'll talk about those a little bit further in a second. But basically, I can say who can see these. So this is where you reduce that clutter by only setting it to be visible to whatever group should be able to see it. Okay. FYI, if you set it to listing agents or any of the agent levels, admins will still be able to see it, right? Admins can check those checklist admins, those people who have that admin managed checklist permission, but they will still be able to see it. What it does, though, is it restricts it so that listing agents will see it, let's say, and not buying agents, right? Okay. So instead of it just being anyone, it's just the listing agents and admins. Alrighty. Let me head back over to the transaction, right? So if I'm a listing agent on this transaction, let's say I'm Monta Jacobs, I would only see those items that have been marked as being able to be seen by listing agents or anyone. Okay, same for on the tasks page. If I'm on the tasks page and I'm an agent, I'll only be able to see that in a separate tab. I'll only be able to see my tasks where I am listed as an agent on the transaction. I've got visibility to the task. Okay. Alrighty. And then obviously this tasks page is my overview of all my tasks that are relevant to me. Okay. So that's the visibility layer. So we've got permissions, that baseline, visibility, setting it at the task level. And then the third layer is @mention. Let's head back over to the checklist template. And you'll notice some of these have an @ symbol and then a name after that. That's called @mention. @mentioning, its basic functionality is to allow you to highlight a task for whoever you @mention. Let's say I wanted to @mention. Let's go back to our users to see who I'm going to @mention. I'm going to do Jordan again, right? Jordan's name is Jordan Smith. She is a TC. Let's remember that, because I'm going to come back to my checklist template and I'm going to @mention @Smith. Okay. And I'm going to say that actually, I'm going to do it in a couple ways. I'm going to head over to my tasks page because that's where my cheat sheet lives. My tasks page shows me all the different, if I hover over your @tasks, that shows me all the different ways that I can @mention people. I can @mention them using it's using myself as an example, whoever logged in user is. I can @mention myself by my last name, my first, I can't point to it because it disappears, sorry guys, but my first initial and last name, my role, and we'll talk about that in a second, or the first part of my email address. So anything before the @ symbol of my email address, which is in this case, Monta plus demo 2. Okay. So I've got those 4 different ways of @mentioning someone. So let's head back to our checklist template here. So I can @Smith because that last name was one of them. Let's also do @JSmith, right? That would work. That's helpful. Actually, this is a good example, right? If I did @Smith, that might actually @mention several people who have the last name Smith. So you can add a first initial to better qualify who that is. So @JSmith, and then I'm also going to do her role because I can mention a whole role of people. And remember, her role under manage users was @TC. Okay, so I can do all 3 of those. I'm going to save that template. Then I've got a profile over here open already for Jordan. And you can see for those 3 where she's been @mentioned, it has highlighted it for them. Okay. So it highlights it to call attention because you're typically wanting to bring that task to that person's attention. Maybe Jordan's the one who's responsible for these 3 particular tasks and you want to highlight it for them. Okay. That'll highlight it for them on the transaction like it does here on the tasks page as well. You saw several highlights when we were on that page, right? I'm logged in as me here. I'm @mentioned in these cases, so it's highlighting them for me here, as well as on the reminder email that goes out. Okay. So that is @mentioning at its core level. It's basic level, which is to highlight. But you can take @mention a step further, a level further to make it even more powerful. So when you're on your checklist template, let's head back and open one of these up. And you're @mentioning someone. Let's say I'm @mentioning Jordan. Again, it's going to highlight it for Jordan. But let's say I not only wanted to highlight it for Jordan, I also wanted Jordan to be the only one who can see it, right? If I @mention her and then set the visibility to @mention, that's going to set this task to only be visible to whoever's @mentioned. That could be, again, the person or the role. Okay. So in essence, that allows you to assign a task to a person by doing it that way. Keep in mind, master admins can always still see all tasks. It's not going to limit it from their view. That would be bad. They've got to be able to see everything, but it does limit it from everyone else, including other admins, other non-master admins. Okay. Those 3 levels or layers of control should give you enough flexibility to be able to make sure that tasks are only being seen by the people that you need to see them and when you need them to see them. Okay. 2 last related global settings that I have to go over because they are related. Let me head over here to admin settings. And they're both under checklist settings, right? Hide completed tasks and transaction checklists. And if that is enabled, which we recommend that you do enable that because it, again, helps reduce clutter. What it does is when a task has been completed, it will hide those. I can still always show them, right? But by default, when this page is loaded, they are suppressed. Okay. Your workflow could require you to continue seeing those, but that's pretty rare. Generally, we recommend hiding those, again, just to reduce clutter. Once they're checked off, people typically don't need to see them on a regular basis. And again, you can always expand them if you need to. Alrighty. And then that last option here is to show checklists from all locations in the Add Checklist drop-down menu. So over here, back on the transaction, when I'm adding checklists to a transaction manually, we obviously suggest you have them added automatically by setting your checklist template up to be added to transactions automatically based on rules that you set up. But in cases where you need to manually add them, which they'll exist, it would only show checklists from the location of the transaction. Right now, this transaction is in the Allen location. The setting is set to show transactions in all locations, so it is showing them from all locations. But if I wanted it to only show Allen locations, I wouldn't see these other location options here, right? That's useful when, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you've got proprietary checklists where you don't want certain groups to see other groups' checklists, then you can set up separate locations, have those people in separate locations, and then set your account up to only show or only allow the addition of checklists in the transactions location. Okay, so you sort of build your permissions and your people around locations, and the transactions are in particular locations, as are the actual checklists. So reduces that visibility when it's appropriate. All righty. And that's it for how to control visibility and management of tasks.